Welcome all to today's ADB Green Roads Build Back Better webinar. My name is David Fay, and I've been with the bank since 2012. Honoured to have worked in the Pacific for 7 years. So building back better post-disaster is close to my heart. So thanks for inviting me along today. House rules first, only the speaker's mic will be live at any time. And we encourage active participation. So please insert your questions in the Q&A box and we can come back to them in due course. Before we move on, please be aware that next week on the 27th, we have our next opportunity to look into practical bioengineering solutions. A really important focus for ADB, given the very significant sums of money we spend on roads and linear infrastructure. So apart from all the other infrastructure investments that we focus on. So make sure not to miss out on that one. Today, the ADB's Climate Change and Sustainable Development Department, they last year released a series of Build Back Better guidelines in October, and the guidelines provide a practical reference to support clients in their efforts to enhance climate and disaster resilience of communities, infrastructure, and systems through effective post-disaster assistance. We are very pleased to leverage that work in these Green Roads webinars today. Note, please, that the title Build Back Better emphasises the opportunity to avoid repeated failures by simply doing what we've always done. Through our project designs, it is important to take an opportunity to add value and increase resilience when it is economically viable to do so. So, as we are all inherently aware, the effects of climate change, unplanned urbanisation, poor risk governance, and the growing complexity of infrastructure systems, they all mean that the impacts of disasters will rise in the decades ahead. So we need to act now. So the compounding nature of hazards and multiple hazard events also underlines the importance to ensure communities and infrastructure systems are equipped or better equipped to cope, adapt, and recover when faced with future potentially more extreme shocks and stresses. So ADB recognised it's essential to provide a window of opportunity to rebuild assets and improve livelihoods, and thereby reduce the risk of future hazards. So this webinar will firstly cover the guide itself, before discussion will be held using a Pacific Island case study. We have two distinguished speakers today. Let me first introduce Anne Orkiza, one of the Build Back Better Guidelines authors. Anne is a Senior Disaster Risk Management Officer whose focus is supporting disaster resilient development and post-disaster recovery, and has a rich work history, previously working for Australia's Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade, the United Nations Environment Programme, the German Development Cooperation, and the Japanese International Cooperation Agency. In those roles, she managed programs on disaster risk management, climate change adaptation, and regional and local development. So Anne will present on the guidelines and how they can support countries in creating a more resilient future. Anne, please take the floor.
Give me a second. Thank you. Can you see my screen? Not yet.
Yes.
You can see my screen.
Oh, not your screen.
One moment. I'll have to share my screen. Sorry about that. Technical issue. I'm trying to share my screen, but okay, one moment. Can you see my screen now?
Yes.
Okay, so thank you very much, David. Good day, everyone. Thank you for inviting the CCSD to share the Build Back Better guide on transport sector. So as mentioned earlier by David, the 6 volumes that comprise the Build Back Better sector guides aim to support our ADB staff, our consultants, and DMC counterparts to enhance climate and disaster resilience of communities, infrastructure and systems through effective and well-designed post-disaster assistance. So the volumes are based on principles, measures, and lessons from international BBB literature, review of over 40 ADB emergency assistance loans between 2004 to 2021, and outcome of consultation with a wide range of ADB staff and external stakeholders. So the volumes were developed with relevant ADB sector and thematic groups. The sectors covered are areas in which ADB has played a key role in post-disaster recovery and reconstruction, and where majority of ADB's disaster and emergency assistance focus in the last 20 years. So in addition to the general overview, which I will briefly discuss later, sectors covered include power, water, sanitation and hygiene or WASH, irrigated agriculture, social infrastructure, and of course, transport. So please check out that link. There's a QR code on the screen for these resources. So the sector guides are really intended to be read in conjunction with the introductory volume on the overview, which covers broad measures that are likely relevant to any post-disaster recovery and reconstruction project, regardless of the sector. So before we dive into the transport sector, let me share the 7 principles that the BBB guides refer to. Of course, first principle is risk reduction. The aim of recovery is to reduce risk in support of a sustainable and resilient future given the changing context. Second is capacity development. It's really important to strengthen the capacity of countries and communities given their leadership role in building resilience and as well as first responders. In this sense, external factors perform are really more of a supportive role or service as may be required. This leads to the third principle on local leadership. Local leadership in decision-making will help ensure recovery processes are suitable and sustainable. So this then flows to the fourth principle on inclusion and equity. So disasters, we know it disproportionately impact on already disadvantaged and marginalized and vulnerable sectors such as people with disability, the elderly, indigenous peoples, women and children. So it's really important to recognize and address societal inequities that could lead to heightened disaster risk and impacts through the recovery process. There are other principles, but in the interest of time, I'll just mention these and please refer to the guides to get more information on these. Other principles would really refer to quality, innovation and technology, and scalability. So underpinned by the principles already mentioned are 10 cross-cutting measures that help ensure recovery is best able to help affected communities and of course countries reach improved, resilient, and sustainable futures. So first cross-cutting measure is about institutional resilience, building, and governance arrangement. So we know that disaster risk management, it's an all-hands-on-deck comprehensive process of engagement among stakeholders across sectors and governance levels, and involving as well the principle of inclusion. So it demands partnership in decision-making, facilitated by strong leadership. In other words, good governance is a must. Second is risk assessment. Building back better must equate with improved resilience, which should be anchored on robust climate and disaster risk assessment. It should also be able to optimize sophisticated tools like remote sensing, GIS, even artificial intelligence, and importantly, it should be able to build on and blend different sources of knowledge, like it could be indigenous, technical, and scientific. Third measure is early warning systems. So it should be end-to-end multi-hazard early warning system that is based on impact-based forecasting. It should reach the last mile towards saving lives and livelihoods and even reducing economic losses. Fourth is land use planning. So we mentioned risk assessment earlier, understanding of hazard, exposure and vulnerability should be able to help government and localities to delineate areas for protection or the no-go zone areas and areas for development activities and investments such as for production, infrastructure, and settlement. This feeds into the fifth on integrated flood risk management, an all too familiar issue of flooding in the region and globally, of course. Six is on standards for resilient building and infrastructure, which is about improving standards such as structural codes, building codes, zoning ordinances, and of course, improving enforcement in practice. Another measure is on capacity development in relation to resilient buildings and infrastructure. Recovery plans and processes must aim to help the affected population in the recovery, and this could mean involvement of people affected to work opportunities like rebuilding their destroyed homes, especially if livelihood is affected. This could require practical skills training for homeowners on safe and affordable construction. Eighth measure is on strengthening local community social systems. While it's not intended, at times aid interventions disregard social systems and undermine social capital. So it's important to engage with local leadership to ensure that there's no intended damage undertaken and a social recovery process is undertaken well. Another one is shock absorptive or shock responsive social protection, which is about expanding existing social protection in the event of a disaster for quick and efficient injection of inputs to avert further losses and negative coping mechanism and facilitate speedy recovery. And final measure, cross-cutting measure is resilient livelihood recovery, which is very important for household and the local economy. And this could include improving access to affordable financial services, income opportunities, livelihood, and diversification of livelihood. So these principles and cross-cutting measures for BBB should be considered not just in the aftermath of a disaster event, but even prior to an event happening as part of preparedness and readiness to recover. So now, focusing on the BBB guide volume on transport. So it provides an overview of good practices, solutions, considerations, and lessons for building back better in the transport sector. So having mentioned general principles earlier, let us focus on principles and themes for post-disaster transport recovery and reconstruction. So BBB in transport also provides a really important opportunity to achieve a range of other benefits that we're targeting in transport system development. This includes improving connectivity and reliability, improving accessibility and equity, especially for the disadvantaged and marginalized groups, enhancing transport safety, recognizing that many of our member countries have this chronic burden of road trauma, road fatalities, and casualty impacts. And while we never want a disaster to happen, we could use this as an opportunity to leapfrog and shift towards more green, efficient, and carbon-friendly solutions. So these are all good. But what we found during the review for preparing this guide is that this works best or enabled primarily when we have good transport planning in place, good risk and resilience informed transport planning, as well as a master planning network analysis in place before a disaster strikes that could really guide the recovery. And this also applies to any other sectors. There are also significant challenges for recovery in the sector. While the challenges are not limited to the three flash on screen, we recognize that these are the most common challenges we face in post-disaster recovery in the sector. So there is this trade-off and pressure relative to time. While all post-disaster recovery projects have this pressure, this is really pronounced in the transport sector, noting that transport sector enables recovery in other sectors as well. So a key solution is to really look at how temporary and short-term solutions could be balanced with longer-term solutions. Another key challenge is the knock-on impacts on decision making. So for example, hard decision may have to be undertaken in not opening or instating a road network in a highly unstable or landslide-prone mountainous area that would that would endanger communities or have a very real human impact. So this needs to be approached very carefully and inclusively in terms of decision making. And finally, more than any other sector, transport sector has huge labor and material needs. So this requires careful balancing of recovery planning and dialogue with other sectors in a cross-sectoral manner, and where possible, prioritizing sustainable local solutions. So now, more importantly, we go to the key climate and disaster resilience measures. So for each measure, some guidance is provided in the guide and some practical case studies on how these were implemented in the post-disaster context. The list is not meant to be exhaustive or meant to apply to every project because the needs following a disaster will really depend on the context. But these are just some of the key measures that really emerge from the study. So let us unpack this a bit. So there are several examples in the guide, but we'll just focus on some that really matters for reducing exposure to natural hazards. So first is network planning, integration, and redundancy. So reconstruction in a wide scale presents an opportunity to review the performance of the transport systems, including the hazard and exposure, look at existing bottlenecks, and then replan and reinstate this in a way that enhances not just the business as usual performance, but also performance in cases of future emergencies. So for example, in the case of Samoa, the cross-island road network that was constructed provides alternative access point between northern and southern coast, enhances the integration between transport modes and networks, and integration as well with other sectors. Another key area that's come through very strongly and had been building over the last decade is incorporating green solutions, including nature-based solutions into the repair and reconstruction of transport corridors. So this example goes back to the earlier Pakistan flooding and landslide events in 2014. Nature-based solutions and bioengineering were employed as slope stabilization technique to reduce future landslide risk. Planting of road corridors provided vital post-disaster income opportunities for community members, including women. And this has generated co-benefits for air quality, community well-being, and biodiversity as well. So I'll just like to plug this resource ADB has made available recently called the Green Roads Toolkit, developed through the Green Roads program. Very comprehensive toolkit of solutions with a menu of options on different green road solutions and where you could look for further resources. So this is available in the ADB website. Check it out. QR code is flashed on the screen. Another measure is Intelligent Transport System, or ITS, for collection and sharing of real-time data on user traffic, environmental conditions, asset conditions, and network performance, which are useful in predicting traffic demand and risk and enabling adaptive management, operation, and maintenance. So it could be integrated in early warning system. It could also provide a broader range of benefits, AI, machine learning, etc. For example, in Uzbekistan, the Karaka-Pakstan road includes ITS to provide real-time information and road condition and hazards to transport authorities to inform rerouting or emergency operating protocols. So we talk about vulnerability of assets, which can be minimized by designing and constructing more resilient transport infrastructure and providing protective infrastructure. So measures to achieve higher levels of climate and disaster resilience are really specific to the asset type, the location, and hazard profile. For example, after the 8.1 magnitude earthquake in Solomon Islands, a decision was made to use Australian and New Zealand design standards as the most appropriate in lieu of local standards to reduce further vulnerability to natural hazards. So for post-disaster reconstruction, materials must be selected as well with care, bearing in mind performance, familiarity of contractors in using such material, the local conditions and hazards, implications on maintenance, as well as availability, sustainability, and cost. So for example, after the 2004 tsunami, the reconstruction of the Didu Harbor in Male incorporated resilient materials that were informed by previous events. So this included an enduring rock type for the seawalls, in contrast to the previous gunny sacks that with cement that decomposed within a few years. There was also steel piping used for the quay and reinforced concrete for the docking areas. So where water-related hazards are a challenge for transport infra, and where building back follows damage to due to extreme precipitation or flooding, it's important to provide adequate water drainage and retention systems to account for future rainfall and flood scenarios. So in Cambodia, after the 2011 Mekong River floods and 2013 flash floods, the resilience of roads and bridges to flooding was improved by providing slope stabilization, side drains in urban areas, and enhancing the capacity of the drainage system to accommodate increased flood risks. So there's also slope stabilization and erosion control. For example, in Bangladesh, geotextile technology was applied for slope protection on railway embankments, reducing the need for temporary repair work and saving public expenditures over the long term. And finally, just want to emphasize the importance of transport sector capacity development. So ADB seeks to embed capacity building in all its projects and investments, including particularly in the post-disaster context. We note that the lack of adequate resources, skills, and planning for regular and preventive maintenance is one of the key factors that contributes to the vulnerability of the transport infrastructure to climate and disaster impact. So as much as possible, we encourage incorporating capacity building into recovery and reconstruction projects. Of course, operation and maintenance are always key, but also important to support authorities and stakeholders. For example, look into their public financial management with respect to using risk-informed planning, budgeting, and financial reserves. So appreciate if you could dive into the BBB guide and see what additional measures there are for you that you could consider. Really hope you will find the guide useful. So as my last slide, just like to flag that we have a BBB dialogue as well forthcoming for WASH and social infra later this month and early March. If you find this interesting, do register. The QR code is on the screen. Thank you and good afternoon. Back to you, David.
Thank you, Anne, and thank you for the Green Roads Toolkit plug. I actually used the toolkit. It was the first pilot project in Tajikistan. It was a really valuable tool just to have conversations on the opportunities. You know, I found it to be a really positive contributor to increasing value-add opportunities and increasing resilience. So to those who are listening, who work with ADB staff, you know, please put up your hands and say, we know about these guidelines. Can we look at the opportunities? And I'm sure they can mobilise resources to help those discussions along. But moving right along, thank you, Anne. Our second speaker today is Dr. Ian Greenwood. He will be a familiar face to many of you. He is a consulting engineer who has a decorated history of distinguished service for the ADB and the World Bank across all of the world's geographies. His inputs have included preparation of resilience studies for transport systems, and he has been tasked with developing mitigation and rehabilitation solutions after disaster events. So he's uniquely qualified to talk to us on this subject today. He will look today at how concepts of Build Back Better have been integrated into an existing transport project, and with his insights and history, he can highlight a few challenges that he's come across the way in actually implementing these ideas under real life budget and technical constraints. So Dr. Ian, please take the screen.
Oh, you're too kind there, David. Hopefully if I share this, it'll all work fine. Hopefully that's all good there.
Yes.
Excellent, thank you. Okay, so I'm going to go through a case study fairly quickly so we've got time for the discussions. Naturally, the guidelines only came out in October, so there's not many projects that have implemented them yet. But what we've done is picked a project that we think incorporates a lot of what is in the guidelines. So the project itself is actually one I've been working on in Tonga, the Napanua Wharf on the island of Awa. I've been working with the Ministry of Infrastructure up there in the World Bank project since 2013. I'm not sure whether the Tongan team have managed to make it online tonight. I know they had some meetings, but if they are, malo. So Tonga gets its fair share of natural disasters. The blue lines there, they represent the tropical storms, the cyclones. When it gets up to that 100,000 people involved, that's basically the entire population of the country. And it works out that they have a good tropical cyclone about every 4 or 5 years on average. And the prediction is that those are going to get bigger and more frequent. They pretty much get the full bingo card of problems. So they've got the tropical cyclones, storms, tsunamis, volcanic activity, and drought. In terms of where is Tonga, that's up here in the middle of the Pacific. So I'll just go there. Tonga itself, you've got the capital, Tongatapu. About 15 kilometres away is Awa. The main islands of Tonga spread over 300 kilometres of ocean. There's a Vavau group near the north, Hapai in the middle. Way off the very top, the Nuas, two very small island communities. Just off the side here is some of the deepest water in the world, the Tonga Trench. I think it's about 50 metres shallower than the Mariana Trench. So we're looking at water that's approaching 11 kilometres deep. And even in this very shallow, very narrow part between the two islands, we still have water that's several kilometres deep. That pretty much means that storm surges, they arrive pretty much as big as they can get. Awa Island itself, we've got the port. There is a small runway, serves sort of a 19-seater aeroplane. But in essence, in terms of bulk goods coming in from and to the island, it's through the wharf is what is there. The island itself has 5,000 people, which in its own right poses some challenges. The wharf I want to look at is here. As I pointed out, the water gets very deep very quickly. So we've got the breakwater. This is about 100 metres offshore, which is at the point where the water is about 100 metres deep. So as I say, the breakwater is very much taking the full brunt of any wave action. You've got the main access point, some typical sort of port facilities. Well, they were typical until they got washed away. And we've got the main road, or the only road that links the top of the island with the southern part. So up around the corner here, we have one of the king's residences. We also have the main bakery and other similar food processing areas for the island. On the southern side, we have the main communities. So that road becomes a very critical link for us. So going back as far as 2017, we knew that the breakwater in this area needed some work. It was starting to show signs of deterioration, but still very, in general, good terms. You know, to cross it, walk on out. It was providing good level of protection. And in here, you'll notice a very robust looking concrete bridge structure, semi-forward, but really mainly a bridge with half a dozen big box culverts. Cyclone Gita and then Tropical Cyclone Harold. They both did a lot of damage. In particular, the second one, Harold, came through, did a lot of damage to the wharf facility, and both of those did a lot of damage to crops. Now, if you take an island community and you take out their wharf, which is their only way of actually getting goods to and from the island, and you take away their food, then you actually have some really significant issues to deal with. So just some images from what happened after these storms. So on the left there, you see the coastal road that got essentially washed away. What was a nice sort of, I guess you'd call it your typical 4 or 5 metre wide paved road, ended up with bits of a footpath in places and not much else. After Cyclone Harold and the second one that came through, you notice our breakwater is no more. It has been washed into the harbour. It meant that until the actual harbour itself got dredged, they couldn't get ferries in, and a lot of just general siltation and that of the basin. We had a lot of the port actually under construction or under rehabilitation at the time. So we had the base of the wall off, and we're in the base of in the stage of reconstructing that when the cyclone came through. So we had I guess a worst case scenario of a very big storm hitting us right at the weakest point that we were in the midst of reconstructing. So we did carry on. We've redoing the work. At this stage, you'll notice that there is still actually a port building, a basic shelter, and of course the port itself is incredibly high use and incredibly important to the community. And with that, I'm going to try and play, if I can, this video clip from one of the locals.
My name, Christopher Wauhea. I'm a proud fisherman, and this is my livelihood. I'm the chairman of Ewa Fishing Community. This is our life. We provide for the community, we provide for the king, we provide for the people, fish every day. But the changing weather, climate change, we don't know when the tsunami comes again. It's very rough, very terrible, very ugly. We need a safer parking area for the little vessels. That's what we need. When the pickup boats are coming, we need to be parked somewhere around that side and give place to the pickup boats. On the way, you just hear a little whistle. Everybody comes here, oh, fish, fish, fish. Everybody comes here to buy fish. We are happy, not only as a fisherman, but a resident of this island. This is great.
The important part to me out of that is to remember that when we're trying to deal with build back better and resilience, we're dealing with people. We think about it in terms of hard infrastructure, but it's actually people we're trying to make more resilient in the communities. So we had those cyclones, and then 2022 we had Hunga volcano erupted. For those of you who don't sort of understand the size of what happened there, the 15 megaton equivalent is sort of hundreds of times powerful than what was in Hiroshima during World War II. Created an immediate tsunami wave that was 85 meters high. That's broadly 3 times that which was Japan, and also 3 times the size of the Boxing Day tsunami. So that's a big body of water. Next point there is traveling at 270 kilometers an hour. and arrived 45 metres high at the next island. AWA itself, it got a modest average of 5 metres. I think it hit the port at 8. So you take an 8-metre high wave at a facility at sea level where the waves break right on the port, and you can imagine the damage that did. So at that point, we effectively lost every other part of our breakwater. We had the undermining of the concrete port terminal itself. So we had these areas where not only had the protection washed away, but then the waves had gone underneath and actually washed out and undermined the slabs. And in many cases, the slabs washed away and all the buildings got washed away. So there weren't many buildings left, but the whole steel structure that was sitting there to provide shelter, it got completely eliminated. And this boat ramp here, which used to provide an access for the small boats when they wanted to take them out of the harbour, of course, is now completely redundant. So that was where we were faced, fairly difficult situation, an ongoing project. We're still working there. We're still rebuilding from the previous cyclone when the tsunami came through. And so looking at how did we respond? The first thing we looked at, or really the community looked at, so I should say, when I say we here, a huge amount of what I'm talking about was done directly by the Ministry of Infrastructure and the community, island community. Like the World Bank, we supported as we could, but of course we were predominantly out of the country for the initial month. So the round of applause here really goes to the locals for what they achieved. So they did what many countries would do. They built some temporary links. The concrete bridge had been washed away. So they got some rubble and got some materials out of one of the local quarries and basically built themselves a temporary non-engineered solution, which interestingly to this day is still the link, as there's debates around what to do. Looking at how to build resilience into the network, the JICA team, the Japanese, they've been looking at whether to build a new link back inland here up from the valley. It would involve about a 100-metre long bridge. And of course, that comes with a fairly significant cost. And you put that in the context of a island with 5,000 people, sort of a once-in-a-generation type tsunami. How much investment is worthwhile? Like, where do you draw the line? Is some of these questions that we're trying to grapple with. And we don't have the right answer, or we don't have the answer, I think, at the moment. In terms of the wharf, we had to get it operating. So we went in with some low-cost protection of the wharf. That's using Coronis material, or coral rock. They are not the strongest rock. It's not the most durable rock, but it's rock that was available on the island. Cut through the slabs in many places, like here, and then filled it back up with concrete underneath. So effectively got it usable. We had to replace some bollards that had been ripped out, and we had to do more replacement of the seawalls and the likes. But we actually got it working. We've then spent probably the last 2 years figuring out what do you do with the port itself? What buildings do you want? And we looked at, do we move the buildings further away? But the reality is you need your port facilities when you're dealing with shelter for people and storage of goods to be at the port. That's where they are. So we can only do so much. What we can do is we can raise them. So the plan is probably looking at lifting it all by 0.5 metre above the surrounding. So when the storm surge comes and a wave breaks across the whole hard stand area, the actual waves in general won't actually get into the terminal. The terminal building itself, basically the idea is that would be largely an open plan structure. So even when a bigger storm came, yes, the water would run through the floor, but hopefully not do a lot of damage. And then there's even a plan or some talk that maybe a ticket kiosk and a coffee cart could actually essentially be like caravans. And when there's a storm coming, you could actually pick them up and tow them away and keep them safe and then bring them back afterwards. But there's challenges, and I think this is really the interesting part, because it's very easy to say, clearly we want to build something bigger and better and stronger and more resilient. But how? First of all, what level of event do we design for? It seems reasonable that we want to design to cover tropical cyclones. They happen regularly, so we don't want to get the disruption and damage from those. Tsunamis, I think we're putting that into the category of, they're very, very rare. We can't afford to be trying to protect everything. We identify that we don't actually need the port to be available during a cyclone. That's because the ferries are not operating. They know there's enough warning for for a tropical cyclone. The ferries get back to Tongatapu. They get their shelter in the good harbour there. They're at dock. So we don't need to worry about how we deal with this ferry facility during this cyclone. What level of inundation is acceptable? Are we worried maybe once every 4 or 5 years if a bit of water goes into a storage shed? Or does that also have to be protected all the time? And what durability is required? Even things like the breakwater. What rock do we use? Do we keep using the local weak material, the coral-based material, and continually go back and top it up and top it up and top it up? Or do you actually spend the money and import good hard rock from Fiji or somewhere else to make a far more stronger and durable breakwater? And then where do we come up looking at some of these issues around, we've got now effectively a clean slate. We've got no buildings, we've got a repaired hard stand, but do we take the initiative and say, well, when we're building back, it's not just a better resilience, but is it a better overall facility? Do we actually separate out the heavy vehicles and passenger access routes? Do we pave a car park? Do we add extra facilities for the Ministry of Infrastructure, for the goods storage? And that's where we realise that, for a lot of these key facilities you have around the countryside, having a master plan in advance is really important. It really helps speed up initiatives, because what we've had to do here is essentially develop the master plan and go through that process while also trying to keep the community connected and working forward in that regard. We also, of course, face the big one, which is money. So Tonga is not a wealthy nation. It's not the poorest nation in the world, but it has funding issues. And our project there for the World Bank, that was set up to rehabilitate several ports, plus doing a whole lot of roads and airports and other matters. But the damage at Awa and the port on Hāpai Group is far beyond what was ever imagined, because we were imagining that breakwater that we could walk on, what we would do to add a little bit more protection to it. Now we're dealing with something that doesn't exist. So a consultant, WGA Group, they have estimated around $18 to $20 million worth of damage is across the two ports. 14 million they think is urgent. We've got a budget of 7. So immediately we're looking and saying, well, we'd love to create you an $18 to $20 million resilient port, or 2 of them, ports, but the money's not there. So what do you do? How do we start trading off? Are we trying to do everything but less of it? Do you become a less resilient breakwater, a less resilient buildings? Instead of concrete structures, are we going for a kit set shed, tin shed type structure? Do we instead just focus on the breakwaters and say, well, at least we've protected things while we figure out what else to do and where to find the money? Or do we do one port first and then another one later? And we haven't got to the end of that discussion yet. That's ongoing, but I think it's a really important part of this whole Build Back Better is also the question of the emergency or disaster funding and making sure there is actually funds available. If I link this now back to what Anne's already covered in the guide, certainly we're looking at adding some potential redundancy in terms of the road network. We're also resurfacing the runway to make sure it's in good state of repair. And we've been doing a lot of resilience studies around the islands. And we've also been doing some other capacity building in that space. We didn't see a lot of areas for the green transport or ITS on the island. You know, they are small coastal issues. But we can make our structures more resilient. We can raise the floor, designing them to be submerged, because one of the things with resilience doesn't mean it's always available. Resilience is about the ability to bounce back. So it's easier to think it often like a tree, you know, a big old tree, it's been there for 1,000 years. In a small storm, a small wind, it sways. The biggest storm, it loses a branch, but the tree stands. And that's how we should think of our infrastructure as well, that we're not expecting 100% of it to always be available, but really it's about how quickly can it be restored afterwards. You know, how quick do you get back up after you've been knocked down? We're looking at, you know, what materials to use, that issue of importing versus domestic materials. Looking at if we replace the bridge, how do we deal with that? And some of the slopes corrosion protection around that. And also, we've been doing a lot of capacity development ever since I've been there and before, to actually build the capacity of the ministry, but also the whole industry. So when we do trainings, we bring everyone into a room, the ministry, the contractors, the consultants. So that's all I want to cover there. Hopefully that's given a little bit of a, I guess, a point for discussions. And David, do you want to lead us through some Q&As?
Well, thank you. And I thought you were going to show us some photos of the post facto. Has it been built yet, what you've done with 7 million?
The actual buildings themselves are still, we're at that point of trying to figure out, where do we spend the money? In essence, or do we, you know, can we find more money? Yeah, it's looking at, you know, can we maybe build some things that are lower cost in places? For instance, a storage shed. Maybe you say a storage shed is not that critical if it did get damaged, so maybe you can go for a lighter structure there, but keep the humans safe. So that those are those. I think, to me, that those are the real aspects of Build Back Better, when you actually have to start making trade-offs and figuring out what you're going to do.
Sure. Did JICA come to the party with that road at the back, or a
They have been
bit of a bridge, or what's happening?
They've been on site and studied it, and I think they're at that point of trying to decide, is that the best use of the funds? You know, it's a 100-meter long bridge, takes people through a different neighborhood for, you know, in essence, a once in a lifetime, you know, type event. So yeah, it's in the process, but yeah, it's not easy when you're dealing with, you know, demands well beyond the funding.
Got it. Look, scope creep, I'm not supposed to be the one asking questions. It's everyone else who's attending. Mark, I understand that you're about to put up a questionnaire for everyone to consider in parallel with the Q&A session. It'll take 1 to 2 minutes of your time. So whilst that is posted, let's have a look at the Q&A box to understand what's been asked. Let's go right to the top. Dr. Ian is asking of Anne, with consideration of the 2023 extreme weather events in New Zealand, what would be your top 3 recommendations, actions to help enhance the resilience of the Auckland highway system?
Thanks, Pete, and trust you well. So for those who don't know, we had a big cyclone Gabrielle hit, did a fair bit of damage across the upper North Island. Well, most of the North Island probably, as people would say. I think Elke's on the line as well somewhere. She was heavily involved in some of the reconstruction efforts in down country. I think, Pete, the first thing, if you look at where that flooding occurred, essentially they built a bathtub. They put, you know, concrete walls, safety barriers either side of the motorway in a low spot, and then it filled up with water and, you know, and made a bathtub 1 meter deep in the middle of the motorway system. Some of that just lacked common sense, you know. So that part, you know, that should never happen. Like that should never have got to the point where the driver to say, oh, we need a big level 5 road safety barrier overruled common sense that says, you don't build a bathtub. The other thing which you see and was interesting is that just north of Auckland, there was 2 roads. This existing road had just been going through, a multi-million-dollar upgrade to make it more resilient. At the same time, a new toll road was being constructed, and they'd opened this road, the old road, after doing almost probably 2 years worth of maintenance, heavy upgrades, and the first storm came along and washed it out. And we see that again further north, the Brenduans, did all this work to make it stable. They hadn't even finished when it washed out. Fundamentally, you need to actually build good stuff from the start. And we see that, we talk about the roads of national significance, the New Zealand program. To me, the most important part is those have been shown time and again to be resilient. You can only put Band-Aid on something for so long. So that basic attention to maintenance, it's not going to deal. Routing maintenance will only get you so far in a major event, but keeping the drains cleaned and all those good everyday things is hugely beneficial. If you've got earth side drains on steep hills, making sure there's some riprap. There's some real basic things which New Zealand gets wrong just as much as everywhere else in the world gets wrong. I won't carry on. I'll give you a chat later on, Pete, if you want. But we'll carry on for time.
Good. Thank you, Ian. So Peter has also posed a question on how effective are nature-based solutions in 2 contexts: those where there's landslides going onto infrastructure, and then, of course, where there's landslides that undermine infrastructure. Obviously a tough question because when we're designing linear structures, linear infrastructure, we don't often have really good geotechnical information to tell us where the difficult parts are. But Anne, let me hand that question to you.
Yeah, thank you, David. Tough question indeed. Thank you, Peter, for liking the presentation. But of course, like any measures, NBS should be informed by the context, and the solution should be fit for purpose, right? So it would be good really to undertake first climate and disaster risk assessment so that we could identify the appropriate solution, whether it's NBS or what have you, that's appropriate for the requirement of the area. But I invite Ian and David to further contextualize this.
Yeah, thanks, Anne. I always think Nepal, when I want to think nature-based solutions in the road sector. They've been leading in that area for decades, got some very good guides. Parts of India have also done some very good work there. But I think if you get those those countries like Nepal with very capable engineers and not much money and difficult terrain, they come up with some very good solutions. And the Nepalese have done that very well over the years.
Indeed.
And if they don't say it can be done, I tend to think it can't be done. But if the Nepalese have got a solution, I'd go with theirs.
Yeah, if only we could bring all of those Nepalese engineers to all of our other countries. Everyone would learn.
Out of interest, their guides are publicly available.
Okay.
I'll see if I can find a link.
Yeah, please do share that. Okay, so a good one from Emma. Do you include within projects capacity building? Sorry, do you include within capacity building efforts the need for training and equipment for emergency response services? In many countries, these are very poorly resourced. With my knowledge of ADB operations, I think the resounding answer is probably 80% no. But ADB is getting better, and of course, with our obligation to Paris-aligned operations to focus on network resilience, these types of efforts are becoming more mainstream. Like, I'm not going to say 20%, but all ADB project officers know that this is a question that's going to come from the ADB board, and we need to be positioned to be able to explain ourselves to get approvals for projects. So,
if I can add to that, I worked on a project, not ADB, in China, probably 5-10 years ago, in one of the mountainous regions. And part of that project, we were looking at where to put all the maintenance depots and which ones to upgrade, because when there's a landslide, you want to be able to attack it from both sides. So there's no point having all your equipment at one side of the landslide, because then you can only clear it half the space. So we did a lot of work with them about their maintenance stations, what equipment was at each one, and looking at how, the history of where landslides were and different things, so that you could actually attack them in a much quicker manner.
If I could just also add, David, of course, you could look at this as your preparedness as well to respond, not straight preparedness, but part more broadly of disaster risk reduction. So we support disaster risk reduction planning at the country level, even climate change adaptation planning, investment planning, and there are ways to, I guess, creatively consider not straight emergency response, because we're not really a humanitarian organization, but supporting the countries to be better prepared for responding and handling. It could be through public financial management. Again, looking into how they are resourced financially, on eventually providing financial resources for responding and recovering.
Right, great. Mark, I guess, would you like to jump in on this question? Yeah, the chat box. Okay, moving on. Look, we've got lots of good questions here, but I have a tendency to try to stick to time. Let's go to Belinda's questions. In the speaker's experience, what is important to convince our DMCs and project counterparts to adopt some of these new innovative approaches, especially where resources are limited? Ian, this is the bread and butter question, isn't it? It's the great problem.
You can have all the dreams and aspirations, and I often think the difference between a dream and a plan is money. That's and we haven't got the resources, the financial resources. That has to be a key part of the whole resilience building of a nation. A number of us been fortunate to hear, and names completely dropped out, the lovely young lady from the Philippines Treasury who's spoken several times at the ADB about understanding how to fund these different disasters and resources to make sure you can respond. The ADB, the World Bank, we can do things pretty well. And after the tropical cyclone Ian, not named after me, but that went through Tonga, the banks were in there working. We worked closely with the churches. We worked with the first Red Cross, with the government. We all get together and figure out how to do these things. The main thing we all bring is money. These countries, they know what needs to be done. They know where things are weak. But it's actually having the funds to do something about it. But often the things, if you look outside the transport sector at what we can learn from them is really important in my view. So after that cyclone went through, destroyed 1,000 houses. And in countries where you've got a lot of palm trees, those things take out power lines. So the ADB came to the party and funded to get the power lines underground to make them actually resilient. Things which are pretty easy to do. Yes, that costs money, but it's not a difficult technical solution. We build houses and we go, okay, build a core of a house that's strong and going to last. The locals will add on lean-tos that we know will blow apart, but when the next storm comes, they've still got this safe shell, this resilient core. And I think, you know, sometimes, again, my earlier comment, I think we mistake this idea of being, you know, big and tough and always being there versus the way it can bounce back.
Got it. Got it. All right. Look, thank you, Ian. Thank you, Anne. We have hit our time target. Before I do close, please all show on the 27th of February. We've got another topic focusing on bioengineering. We'll come back to that nature-based solution discussion, no doubt. Thank you all for your time and interest, and I'm looking forward to seeing you at the next event. Thank you.
Thank you, David.
Thank you, David.
Thanks,
and
everyone.
Bye.